And for everyone to gain full knowledge, I would like to officially introduce everyone to the FORUM'23 with the first topic, form follow system. And our speaker is Mr. Wong Mun Summ, who is the founding director of WOHA Singapore. So Mr. Wong Mun Summ co-founded the Singapore-based architectural practice WOHA in 1994. He is a professor in practice at the National University of Singapore, Department of Architecture, and co-direct the Integrated Sustainable Design Master Studio. He is also appointed to the Southern Chair in the Practice of Architecture at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. He sits on the nominating committee of the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, the Design Advisory Board of the Design Singapore Council, as well as a member of the CTBUH Master of Tall Building and Vertical Urbanism Advisory Panel. Very exciting, right? And may I inform you further that for WOHA project, it is the living systems that connect to the city as a whole. With every project, the practice aims to create a matrix of interconnected human-scale environment that foster community, enable stewardship of nature, generate biocentric beauty, activated ecosystem service, and build resilience. And Mr. Wong Mun Summ is currently leading projects slated for completion, such as the Brak University in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 2023, the Pan-Pacific Orchard 2023 as well, and Bengal Digital District and SIT Campus in Singapore 2025. And before I invite Mr. Wong Mun Summ on the stage, let me inform you that we are so very honored to have Kun Yosapon Bunsom, co-founder and director, landscape architect, Shuma Company Limited, who acts as a moderator on the topic. He will help us to ask interesting questions and find answers together with us. And if you have any question, again, leave it to the end, and we will dare to answer them.
I want to start by showing you an image of Datai Langkawi. This was my very first project when I graduated from university. Given this opportunity to master plan, to finishing the project from architecture to interiors. And what is really amazing, the greatest opportunity was to work with nature. And to see it after 30 years, that nature has embraced it, has claimed it back a little bit, but the architecture works wonderfully. I went there to celebrate my 60th birthday, and what was really amazing that I could actually feed the hornbills with my hands. And I think this is something that sort of encapsulate the way we believe in our work. We really wanted to work with nature. And this is one of the best memorable projects that I have, being able to sort of wrestle with nature and yet accomplish something fairly meaningful. And that started my journey, our journey into where we are today, which I will talk about, and to share with you our evolution and our journey on our architecture and design. These 3 books are very important to us. It helps to clarify and also inspire us. The first book, The System View of Life, is all about connectedness and relationship. And it's about seeing the world as a living network and not as a machine. Seeing life as a systems comprised of interconnected networks. The Web of Meaning offers a coherent alternative worldview based on interconnectedness showing how modern scientific knowledge echoes the ancient wisdom of earlier cultures. And the last book, which is important, implores us to reject short-term thinking and to think long-term to build a better future. I think this is a very important sort of a direction that we should take with our design and our thinking for the world. I will go through a little bit of our sort of evolution, and then after that, I'll through some series of buildings, prototypes. We'll explain the title, the topic, which I want to talk about is form-follow systems. In 2010, we have been looking at how buildings can actually do more. And in our exhibition, more and less in 2006 in Berlin, we argued for buildings should be more ambitious in wider effects. And then in around 2006, we actually did a studio in NUS where we looked at Singapore 2050, which is not too far away, and started discussing about how Singapore can be self-sufficient in food, energy, water, in a hybrid element such as energy harvesting, expressway, and public housing estates as solar farms. So these were the genesis of some of our thinking currently, and some of our projects too have evolved into prototypes and buildings that accomplish some of these wider effects. And then in 2011, we were invited to have a solo exhibition at the German Architectural Museum in Frankfurt. And together with the curators, the term breathing architecture was sort of given to the title of the exhibition and the catalog as well. And what it does is that it actually shows us, for us ourselves and then to the wider audience, how passive strategies makes a huge impact, and that through thinking about passive strategies in a wider perspective, it does evolve form making, particularly in the tropics, of course. And then in 2011 to 2016, we felt like we needed to put together a book. In fact, we wanted it to be a textbook for students and for decision makers who are keen on the topic of architecture, design, and also how it could incorporate sustainability, the bigger picture. And we also thought through a lot of our thinking, our strategies, and also worked out indexes and ratings that we feel could have a good impact, sort of a transformative qualities in buildings and in cities. So some of these indexes are covered here is like Civic Generosity Index, Self-Sufficiency Index that covers ESD to the end game, and then also things that we were also very concerned about is how much public spaces, community spaces that we have within our buildings. And last but not least, ecosystem services is really about what nature, in terms of services that can provide to us as human beings and also to the regeneration of the planet. So that was a huge milestone in our careers. And currently this is where we are. We are just put up, well, Thames and Hudson wanted to do a book on us to sort of put in a book what we've been doing. But for us, it was also about a few chapters in this book about how we are moving forward, how we are scaling up in our projects and our ambitions, and also about explaining how form-follow systems, and in this book it was entitled New Forms of Sustainable Architecture. So where we are now is with these three bubbles sort of overlapping, and we are sort of developing a framework and methodology that would now include almost economical and technological aspects to the whole bigger picture. Newer indexes are coming, like nutrition index in our buildings, and also hopefully some sort of a new other kind of indexes that might help push us a little further in our architecture and design. So just a few basic outlines of our approach. We are rejecting 20th century urban planning, but we call for a 21st century urban design that must find ways to enhance multiple productive systems at once: social, technological, economic, and ecological systems. Designing is about relationships between components. It's just as important as designing the elements themselves. And the analogy is the difference between studying about individual plants and animals versus the study of an ecosystem. Productive systems have positive feedback loops, which make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. Through system thinking and system design, productivity, sustainability, happiness will increase by developing positive feedback loops. System thinking and design makes the problem as big as you can. We don't look at the problem and make it small, but we make it as big as we can. So that the initial brief is just part of a tiny part of what we need to embrace. Analyze current and proposed relationship with the international, national, regional, and local systems. Understand the developments as change of existing system flows, and look for positive outcomes through improving good relationships and breaking negative ones. We don't assume that everyone else has thought of the big picture. Most people work hard to make the problem as small as possible. Look for win-win adjustments by designing relationships which cost nothing except design time. Same staff organized differently for higher productivity and better outcomes. Tackle roadblocks which prevent these positive outcomes. Patrick Bingham-Hall, a writer and also the publisher of our book, has sort of pointed out that our what we are sort of more well-known, or the aesthetic that we have come out, is really a graphic expression of the programmatic strategies. So at WOHA, we design everything as if it belongs to a regenerative city of the future. Each project is seen as a component within an existing system affecting them for good, and each project seeks to seek positive ripples that might trigger further positive change. And each project is open to future systems connections. I would go through a series of projects by height and scale, and also how through seeing our projects as prototypes, we are able to evolve these prototypes into larger scale and to vary the prototypes into covering even more different types, and then eventually scale up into a larger concept that may embrace how we can see the future of cities. So I start with mid-rise typology. Since in Singapore, because of our land limitedness, we tend to have sort of a mid-rise typology more so than low-rise typology, and then of course high-rise typology. But for us, mid-rise typology can be high density. But what is important for us is to embrace the fact that we could actually have a very different kind of strategy towards this mid-rise height. For us, very important is the horizontal stratification and keeping the ground level as porous as possible, but having this new multiple ground levels. One stressing on the fact that it's ground level, and we can multiply it vertically. Ground, because you walk horizontally, you can plant trees, you have a landscape, and you can actually enjoy the environment a lot more. Sky garden terraces, topographical architecture is how in buildings we can support nature. But one important thing in building in the tropics is about being one unit thick, being able to achieve good quality of light, good cross ventilation, etc., etc. And then one of these true building forms, manipulating forms, we are able to create horizontal, vertical, and courtyard typology breezeways. So I start off with the School of the Arts in Singapore, finished in 2010. I think it's not a very well understood building, but very radical in thinking for us, where the classroom blocks becomes very crucial to the funneling of wind through these negative spaces, which are the void spaces, where it becomes the social spaces for the students. Social spaces, as we all know, is where students mingle a lot. They learn from each other, they learn from educators, and etc. Using large elements like the library, the lecture theaters, it helps to funnel the wind into this space. So what is also important in the building, there are two very important horizontal stratums. One is a lower level, which is where the performance spaces are. Only performance spaces are air-conditioned. The rest are very porous, non-air-conditioned pre-function spaces. And it's porous in the city. You can actually walk through the lower datum as a member of the public. This duplicates also as the pre-function space for the auditorium, which you will see after this, but it's also the drop-off for this school. I mean, this school is actually located in the city itself, and where you have lots of footfall, and you also have quite a bit of vehicular traffic. But on the upper level, you can see is basically 3 linear blocks, single classroom blocks, and negative spaces in between them. But as you can see, this is actually level 5. It's almost as big as the site itself. We call this a new ground level, where it is actually the safe and secure space for the school. And you have the assembly spaces, the canteen spaces, the large social spaces within the school. And you can see these are the horizontal breezeway. And we call it horizontal breezeway because what we have done is that after a few years of the school operating, we've got a Transolar, the climate engineers here to validate this building. And they've been able to record 1 to 2 meter second wind flow through these spaces. And because of that, you have very effective cross ventilation through the classroom, even though this is inside the city itself. In fact, so much so that the cross ventilation is so good, the oxygen level in the classrooms is lower than the schools outside the city. So this is a very important validation, so much so that we feel very comfortable with this typology, and that we have been able to scale up this in the following project that I will show. So these are the breezeways, which are what I call the negative spaces, the social spaces. The circulation spaces are exaggerated to become amphitheaters, stages for this School of the Arts, where students will perform, students will draw on the walls, etc., so that they can express themselves within this building. Then again, we also have all these nice quiet areas that are good for students to mingle, to learn from one another, but also have informal teaching within all the spaces as well. All this within the middle of the city. As you can see, the image on the right, you can look down and you can see the roofs of the shop houses, the heritage buildings that we have in Singapore. So when I said we scale up this typology, We did it for a university in Bangladesh. This will finish sometime in this year, and I must say we are very proud of this building. 12 years in the making. As you can see, this is the site plan. It's sort of built on top of when we first visited, it was a very toxic pond where a lot of discharge was made into it by the neighborhood. But we saw the positive aspects of it, that we can, through a nature-based solution, maybe help clean it, cleanse it, and turn this larger area into a park for the community, but also for the university as well. So in terms of how we manipulated form to follow the systems that we were very interested in, the first diagram really is about the quantum of the area we needed to put in, turning them into 1 unit thick classroom blocks. We created horizontal breezeway because this is being Dhaka. We wanted to set a very good example of how to build in the tropics. We didn't want to rely too much on expensive mechanical systems to create the microclimate within the buildings, but to use innovative passive strategies to do that. We were interested in creating nice environment for the university to actually have social spaces and also to educate the students. The sky parks and the sky gardens were created in between the classroom blocks. Ground floor was lifted up so that we can actually allow this to be used by the university to communicate with the public. The public could actually use it as a public park as well. To top it off, we had the solar canopy, and the solar canopy provides shade and shelter for the roof, which is used as a recreational space. This solar canopy can provide up to about 75% of the energy needs of the university. So you can see the image, or the colorful image is a rendering. The building being superimposed onto the city of Dhaka. And the black and white is a picture that was sent to us a couple of months back. This is where it is. They have put up the solar canopy. It was something which I thought may not happen, but due to the fact that you do have energy shortages in Dhaka, it was very important for the university to have a very reliable energy source for the students and for all the computers they will have. And so this is something that they work together with the World Bank for all the right kind of green financing, and we were able to realize this large solar canopy. These were the small little spaces, entrance spaces that you go into the university, and then to the ground level, which we see as a community park. You can see the image on the right being executed with sort of brise soleil, and the green screens are put in and will be planted soon. But what is really quite necessary to highlight that we were working with local knowledge and skills. There is such a reverence for Louis Kahn and Le Corbusier in Bangladesh. We too, of course, admire these great masters, and that this was a little bit of a homage to these great masters. So you can see the rendering is it's a colorful one, as we see the ground level as one that is actually a water landscape that uses nature-based solutions to cleanse it. And the left is the one that is currently in. I took that image myself a couple of months back. Once it's finished, this is what we'll get. And this is the ground floor space, as I mentioned earlier, is that this, the reflection, this is what we term as a tropical community space. Very sheltered, events, activities can happen 24 hours, 365 days, rain or shine. But as a section and plans, what's important to note is the ground is lifted up. You can see the lecture theaters, the library becomes funneling devices for the prevailing wind to enter the horizontal breezeways. Instead of depending on lifts to bring students up a high-rise school, university, we rely on escalators and staircases to connect major datum levels. And this helps to move people very quickly within the university. There will be 20,000 students here, and to move them from classrooms to classrooms, from lecture theaters to lecture theaters, we had to be very efficient. And actually, this model of the mid-rise typology is a more efficient typology than a spread-out horizontal university campus, like NUS in Singapore. It can take you almost 30 minutes to get from one end to the other end, and then you still have to run. But this one will be very quick. And you can see on the bottom part is the horizontal breezeway. The spaces between the one architectural space thick blocks are the negative spaces, are the horizontal breezeways. The plan shows very clearly the ground level really is the public amenities of the university, and then the park itself extends to the neighborhood. We embrace the neighborhood to actually use it as a park. Upper levels are quite simply the one sort of classroom thick typology. Upper levels, as you can see, bright and airy, bring light in through the sort of voids as well, and that one is what we are currently today. Those little two are planters where trees will be planted in them, and then it has all the sitting spaces around it so that the students can actually use it at their leisure. And then as you sort of walk up from the last floor up, you go up to almost the entire footprint of the site again as the recreational space for the university. And on this image over here, you can see this horizontal metal level. That is the 200-meter running track. And in the middle of the running track is a 25-meter short course swimming pool. And to top it off is the solar canopy. So it's maybe mid-rise, but we packed in all the amenities of what a university would be expected. This is the short course swimming pool, which has got an infinity edge pool that looks into the city. The oval is the 200-meter running track, and then the solar canopy at top. And this is something very necessary in Dhaka and in Bangladesh. This is the cricket pitch. Okay, so whether this can also be a typology for somewhere else, we were given an opportunity to do a design for Shanghai. It was a very large complex made up of almost 4 large parcels. There is this approach to sort of a parcellation of plots into smaller plots, but we felt maybe, we should look at the how to aggregate plots to make a bigger impact in a building. Because the owner actually owns all these 4 plots, but it was told to them that they have to build this road to dissect into 4 parcels. And we wanted to see whether it was possible to find a different solution. So this was a project that was interesting. We were looking at the needs of Shanghai, China, and also this area. And the client business was into a lot of import and exports of food. The Shanghai Convention Center is nearby, which hasn't got a lot of sort of food F&B outlets. So this was envisioned as a gourmet paradise of fruit produce as well as F&B outlet, but at the same time as an elderly housing facility for private individuals and also the sort of middle income as well. So on the lower level, it's almost like a marketplace where the linear blocks created streets. And on the upper level is a sort of a courtyard donut typology where it looks into a very beautiful park. So it's connected to the stream, and we wanted to activate it with water mobility, and then to have be able to bring a little bit of Thai sort of ambience to this as well, where we can actually have a food market, something to create an interesting, different approach to in China, and you have all these food market halls underneath. Then above is the safe and secured environment for the residential. What we really like to do is, I mean, we do a lot of buildings in the tropics, but we also love challenges in different climate, and where you can actually work with the different seasons to play with color, to play with light, to play with plants, and to actually play with the different seasons. So as envisioned here, the ground floor is a icy, snowy winterland. This is the section that sort of typifies the horizontal low mid-rise typology for us, where it's two datums. Ground level, very porous, and then the upper level is one that is actually a new ground level, one that you can almost see a large park where all the residents look into. It's double loaded, so you can look both directions, and then with courtyards that allow the spaces below also to have natural light and ventilation as well. And then on the top itself, there's a full loop that becomes a sort of a, we call it the leisure walk, the loop, where the community is actually sort of connected. And it's almost 1 kilometer long as you walk all around the building. All right, so within this typology too, we have added this one in as part of this mid-rise. It's not very tall, this building. Park Royal Collection of Pickering is maybe a little bit sort of well-known. It's very visually green. But for us, what is really important about this project was the acoustic intent that we wanted for this project. You see this piece of land, this pocket park in front. This pocket park was Singapore's first and only private public park. It was a rich businessman donated then $3,000 in 1876 to convert this into a park for workers. And when we got this commission, we said, could we match this same generosity? Of course, we couldn't turn our land into a park, but we said maybe we could replicate the same area in the park as greenery in the building. So we achieved a 250% green replacement through introducing sky gardens, terraces within the buildings. This section is important. It shows you how the car park, which is on the level 3 and 4, is being used as an infrastructure, as a system, a form to actually support the landscaping that we put in the building. Very key is the fact that the car park space is very easy to maintain and service all this landscaping. So that's why I think it thrives very well, because you can actually maintain them very well. My advice to people who wants to do integrated greenery within building, you do need to think about how you maintain the plants. If you can't maintain it, it's a slow death to all the plants. So you can see here is the park, the calculation of how we did it through the buildings, a total of 250% green replacement. And visually, quite stunning. You can see these tiers of green. Before this building, drone didn't exist. But when this building was finished, drones started to come in, and you actually can see the impact as if you were in the higher floors of the neighboring buildings. This is the sort of view that you get. We think that this multiplication of ground level is important in the city. not just on the ground floor. If you multiply it in a high-rise building, people in a high-rise can also appreciate it. And on the ground level, quite simple, the way we achieved it through planters all around the buildings and a car park. The one on the right is this part, which really is the ramp to the car park. And you can actually service it very easily. But it's always interesting. I think Frank say your architecture isn't bad, hide it with greenery. But I think we need to also do good architecture. And I think it's very important that we don't hide the building. We need to work with the landscape. And that's why we always say work with nature and not let nature overwhelm you. And this is why we also think about how we treat the ceilings as seeing like avatar landscape, where you have this interesting ceilings to look at. And actually this strategy works so well in this building and you can see people walking on the streets, stopping, taking pictures. And it's really because of the ceilings, I think, and the imagination of it being a very different kind of aesthetic. And of course, the fifth floor becomes the largest leisurely and recreational space for the hotel and the offices. And again, even on the fifth level looking up, it's also interesting to see all this and to be able to see the underground, the ceiling as contours, like a mirror effect of a paddy field. That's what we wanted. And then to have creepers coming down, seeing it on the edges, and of course the night lighting is equally fun as when you project the canopies onto the ceilings, the silhouette rather. But also at the same time, work with architecture, passive strategies. We convince operator and the developer, why don't we make all the corridors, guest room corridors, naturally ventilated spaces so that you can breathe, feel, smell Singapore. And at first they were really horrified because this was next to Chinatown. But what was really nice was that when it was finished, all the guests said, it's so nice to be able to smell Singapore, And I think we appreciate the fact that as human beings, we do want to be able to feel the climate. I know it's particularly hot in Bangkok now, but I do encourage you not to abandon the embracing climate and embracing your weather. It's important that we don't give up hope, but we should always see a brighter future ahead. But as you see all these gardens stacked up above, it becomes a vertical landscape for the social housing behind to enjoy. And one really good feedback we got was that one of our staff used to live in the housing behind. And when this project was finished, they were looking at this. The owner decided to raise his rent because he says, your view now is better. So I think this is a positive feedback, and I think something that we always get very tickled by. And from the rooms, you look into landscape before the distance view. I think that gives you a very interesting new perspective. And without drone, we can't see how dramatic it is. This image has, what is really spectacular about this building is not, for me, not so much the architecture, but the reach it has got through social media. And we use an agency called Meltwaters to track the reach of all our projects and our brand. This building has reached a total of 3 billion. And equivalent to, I think, US $200 million advertising budget. So the owner doesn't need to spend money on advertising and promotion, but they're always full. So that's the beauty of a successful, Instagrammable project. Public housing behind. That was where one of our staff used to stay and his rent got increased. And as you can see, the roof was entirely covered in solar panel. This was, for us, another groundbreaking building typology. We are not commissioned for it, but it's informed us. The exploration is quite important. This was a competition that we took part in where it was meant to be the headquarters of a ministry in Singapore. We set very ambitious target. We wanted to be, it's 100,000 square meters of office spaces. We wanted to be zero energy and carbon neutral. And also have an expression for what an energy building would be. So as you can see, as you can see from this image, we had a little bit of a black tower with a little silvery globe on top. This is a hot stack wind funnel where we heat up through the black tube, the funnel, so that we can suck in the air from the bottom and up at the top. And then with the aerodynamic globe on top, the air escapes through to actually have this elevated sort of a wind speed within the tunnel so that we can actually have a more interesting, cooler microclimate on the ground level. And why we do that is because we, this is a courtyard breezeway typology. We lifted the donut building up, turning the entire ground floor into a public space and also a urban park that can be used for performances, for community engagement. And you can see this little funnel there that's actually part of the lift that brings you to all the important datum levels where you get to access the ministry buildings. It's likely designed into two parts. The lower level, one half of it is a courtyard typology that connects the entire 4 towers together, and it's a courtyard, and then above that, there are 4 individual towers because there were 4 different stakeholders within this ministry. But also, this one gave us the opportunity to envision what a new office building will be like. Because we needed to rethink the energy use within the building, and that we needed to turn up to 40 to 50% of spaces as a hybrid system or naturally ventilated systems. Only the tower core itself was air-conditioned and hybrid, but otherwise we depended a lot on landscaping and the courtyard typology to create a different kind of a work environment. So you'll be working within landscape itself. So the ground floor, we actually put cars right into the basement. For us, cars belong to the basement because we are thinking about the future. In future, we won't drive our own cars. We'll be drop off on the ground level, and then the cars drive themselves and park into the basement. So, and I think that's important that the ground floor becomes dedicated for pedestrians and for community use. So you can see the cars on the basement. The ground level is a very nice, vibrant, verdant sort of a landscape. This is the ground level, you can see, which is actually used for community engagement. And this is a plan you will see of the ground floor being a very verdant landscape, and then on the upper levels is a continuous loop of office spaces. In this plan, the inner courtyard are all the garden spaces, but this is also where we have the informal working spaces, meeting pods, rest areas, small little lecture theaters, etc. And this is the environment that you get in the middle. And from some of our examples we know, and through some of our work that we've done, through landscaping and the using form to manipulate the microclimate, we can expect 3 to 4 degrees lower temperatures than outside. So if outside was, say, 30 degrees, here could well be 26 degrees. And with elevated wind speed through ceiling fans, we can actually make it even cooler. So it's good enough for spaces that are slightly informal, that you would want for an office space. But to tackle embodied carbon, though for such a building, we do need steel or concrete, but instead we propose to have the concrete structure spanning 3 floors, and in between that, we actually use cross-laminated timber technology, to best use what timber is good for. It is very flexible, and you can actually manipulate them and create different kind of volumetric spaces within these datums. Concrete and steel is good for carrying the load of the building, so it's actually used up to every 3 floors, but in between that, we're actually using timber to do it. So, but what you can actually see here too is that the facades are all we have sun shading fins that are also building integrated PV panels. They are effective only because the surface behind it is cool, and that's why we have another layer of landscaping, but it also acts as the foreground view for the offices as well. So, and I think this works hand in hand. Nature has a funny way of telling us how to actually design. So I think this is really quite important in this project where we calculated the energy production that we can have. It was only through this, all the surface area of the courtyard, magnifying the area of the surface area of the building, we were able to have the building integrated PV on the facades. Then we could actually get the amount of energy, clean energy for the building. And of course, the top level, our favorite is to have a running track, a recreational space for the office. Okay, we move upscale a little bit onto the stack skyscraper typology. A few added components, a clump sandwich approach. As we go into a skyscraper typology, because of the quantum of area, we do need to bring in different uses. That's why it's called the clump sandwich approach. And then seeing sky community, sky terraces, screens of green. And now with the skyscraper typology, it's become a breezeway atria, as well as a horizontal breezeways as well. Let's see how it works. This is not a tree, it's a vertical building, a skyscraper. And one that is actually sits among all the glass and steel buildings in Singapore. It's actually greener than this at the moment. But it's a very refreshing building. We get a lot of compliments from friends as well as designers telling us that it's such a refreshing view for them where they walk past it, because they see living things. They see bees, they see birds, and I think that tickles people a lot. As a transformation of the form, manipulating the form, you can see how your normal glass and steel, solid core, sealed out spaces kind of messing would be, but we decided to differentiate the components within it and created breezeway atrias, and then with a aluminum mesh, we allow creepers to grow on it. And in all, with all the vertical and horizontal spaces, we created a green replacement of 10 times the site. This is, I think, quite an interesting plan where you don't have the central core where the lifts are. It's actually an L-shaped block that rotates 180 degrees at every datum. And the section shows it very well. And that you create this large atrium spaces within this skyscraper typology, and also large urban windows that looks out into neighboring buildings and so forth. But one thing that is actually very interesting for us is this picture suggests glass, steel, concrete versus green. This is using a thermal imaging thermometer to measure the surface temperatures of buildings. The one on the top is the Tanjung Pagar Center, which is all steel and glass, and the one below is Oasia Hotel downtown. The surface temperature is almost 20 degrees less. This is the key to solve urban heat island effect in cities. Bangkok, you need that. So, but it also helps bring the energy consumption down. That's a very interesting revelation too. But most important for us is that if we had this amount of vertical landscaping covering your buildings, you are not radiating heat. Anything that is not green will always radiate heat. Green doesn't. Greenery absorbs, takes in heat to turn into energy for themselves. That's photosynthesis. So as you can, and we have now gone further to calculate ecosystem services in our buildings. And ecosystem services is not difficult to calculate. There is an easy tool in the market that you can actually use to calculate the ecosystem services. What it means is really what greenery does to regulate air quality. And you can see here air filtration, nitrogen removal, particle removal, evaporation, transpiration, etc. But what is interesting is that if you compare it against a pristine lowland rainforest, which is what Singapore originally is, this building somewhat performs quite well. So this building occupies almost the entire site area, but it performs ecosystem services of a pristine rainforest averaging 30%. That is, for us, very fascinating. Not only does it tackle urban heat island effect, but it turns heat, it turns carbon dioxide into fresh air for us to breathe. So I think this is something worthwhile to look at how buildings does more. It just doesn't provide the function for cells, but it has got regenerative qualities for our planet as well. So this is a good image for me, because when I did this building, the only thing I had in mind was squirrels, because I wanted squirrels to hop from the tree onto the vertical green and to climb onto the terraces up in the higher level. And the general manager of this hotel has told me that in the mornings, 6 a.m., he actually sees squirrels on the hotel lobby floor. But also what's interesting is that because it's adjacent to a linear park and a small little park, it has the same amount of urban biodiversity, the same amount of birds and insects actually live in the building. So that's also a very interesting revelation. But architecturally too, we wanted a building that relates to the city, getting the scale, getting this, we call it domesticating superstructures by breaking the scale into very recognizable scale, shop houses scale, maybe sort of 10-story blocks. So it sort of creates that kind of relationships of scales. And yet, at the same time, it can be a skyscraper. So this atrium here is the hotel lobby where the squirrels were spotted. And the atrium here is about 10 stories tall. Just like the Four Seasons, we were very keen on showing the transformation of the building. The building was red because when it's green, you only see pockets of red, which like flowers. So this was the reason why we selected red. And as in like Christmas and Coca-Cola, red, white, and green goes very well together. So red and green goes perfectly well together. So this, the time lapse was done over a period of 6 months to show the growth of the plants. And this is a very unusual clip, a little girl running on a lawn in a skyscraper. Yes, biodiversity thrives in this building. Yet another typology, or rather a different example. This was a competition we did win, but unfortunately the brief was changed. We were excited by this competition in Shenzhen, because the brief was unique. They wanted a tower block of offices and Sohos, which is home offices, small, little, very fine texture, sort of a typology. So they wanted that in a building, a skyscraper. So as the form suggested, you can see this rendering. It has almost a corporate office building, but it also has this sort of very fine scale cluster of Sohos embedded into the skyscraper. But within the vertical skyscraper typologies, we can create horizontal breezeways where we detach the Sohos away from the core and created internal streets and also for cross-ventilation. So as you can see, we created quite a vibrant inner amphitheater of activities that's looking within the core, using sort of sun tubes. We are able to bring in light to illuminate all the spaces. And hopefully also what we wanted, also the interior core would also be green. So as you can see, these are the internal streets of these clusters that actually sort of alternate between corporate offices and the Sohos. So this was a very interesting typology for us because it's all about, for an office building, it's not just one scale, it's various scales. You have, I mean, in Singapore, it's really quite nice because in our city area, we have the shop houses, and then we also have the skyscrapers. So we are able to cater to the different scales. But in China, everything is a new district, everything is a new master plan. You don't have that luxury of fine scales development. So we wanted to create this in a skyscraper. And so this was a highly interesting one for us. So The Sohos were like little home offices, and our criteria for each of this cluster was that it would have a sort of a cafe is necessary, a daycare center for young and old is also necessary. These were three components we feel were very important to make creative industry work within a Soho cluster. Yes, but when we got awarded the job, the brief completely changed into a very boring and dull one type of office building itself. But we wanted to keep some integrity in the design, and we broke it down into the fact that even with corporate offices, you need different scales. You also have the small offices, and you also have the large offices. But so we inverted it instead. We created these little clusters as little hills for the larger corporate clients, and then the tower itself had little smaller buildings that they have smaller little offices of 100 to 200 square meters of footprint. And to express this hills as sort of a corporate identity for the slightly larger corporations within it. But one thing that we have sort of incorporated is the landscape or the surrounding where you had lots of little hills and valleys. We wanted to bring this into the buildings. So you can see externally it's expressed as hills, internally they're expressed as little valleys of greens. So you can see the plan where we have the large floor plates. Each floor plate becomes quite large in a skyscraper, almost 500 to 600 square meters. And then, but they have an internal air well that they all look into, which is a sort of a valley that we created where we have landscaping and cascading water features. Within that cascade of the valley is where we located the cafe, the daycare facilities. And then you have these breakout spaces as sky gardens and terraces on top of the hill. So this is a rendering. This was finished during COVID, so we haven't been able to gain access to look at the internal spaces. So this was our rendering. Before that, you have these valleys, but you can see on the right where you're looking down into a cafe. So this is a transfer lifts lobbies, so everyone goes through these levels, and then there's always a cafe, a daycare facility within these major terraces. Okay, this one is something in Singapore that's about to finish. It's for us a slightly different typology. This is the breezeway atria, but incorporating fun landscapes. This was reimagining Orchard Road. This was about rethinking Orchard Road. We all know that shopping is being challenged. And in Orchard Road, because all this time it has remained fairly the same formula, when we're given this opportunity to rethink the redevelopment of this hotel, we wanted to see how we can cause a change in people's mindset to how to think about Orchard Road and tourism. So with this hotel, we wanted to break it down into 4 boutique hotels, and each boutique hotel has a quality, a feel that is unique to Singapore. We have on the lower terrace, we have the forest floor, where we have large forest trees and a cascade of water. And then on the 5th floor terrace, we have a beach. We are an island, but we don't have great beaches. But we wanted to also reinforce the idea that we do have beaches, so we created a beach on the Sky Terrace. But Singapore is so well known for its gardens, and we wanted to put botanic gardens within this hotel as well. So we created a garden terrace, where it's a very curated garden that you actually can use it for cocktail parties, even weddings, and other functions. And then, let me go back to, and the last floor, which I didn't mention, Singapore is a land-limited paradise. We all live in high-rise, okay? Only very selected people, class of people, only 1 or 2% live in landed property. So we wanted that feel of being in the clouds. So the ballroom is located at the top terrace, where you could have a wedding in the clouds. This is what it is today. It will probably open in 2-3 months' time. Quite exciting. As the scaffoldings and the coverings are removed, we are getting a lot of interest in the buildings. This was just us, the first time we were testing the lighting. And one thing that, again, in the earlier projects that we mentioned, the ceilings are so important in the high-rise buildings with sky terraces and gardens. Here, we didn't use the same strategies, but we used a stainless steel mirror ceiling to reflect the activities on the terraces itself. We wanted on Orchard Road to be able to see people swimming in the gardens, in the clouds. Okay, this is another major shift in typologies. This is our housing, a vertical city typology. And here, key strategies: high density, high rise, high amenity. The key is high amenity. The moment we increase density, we must also increase amenity. Again, the stacked and club sandwich approach, cities within cities, and so forth. The precursor to all our projects in housing is this competition. In 2001, Duxton Plain competition. We didn't win this. I think we're given a commendation. But what really, this is a seminal project for us. What's really important is the thinking behind it. How we can actually use clusters of high-rise buildings and connect them with sky streets and sky parks. And as a very radical kind of a section, you can see here high-speed lifts that brings you to every 5 floors, and that you can walk 2 or 3 stories up and down to your units, but at the same time, you also can use localized lift for accessibility. But what is really important is this horizontal movement we want to create in a vertical city. If you go to any skyscrapers, the only form of movement is inside the lift as a vertical vertical circulation. And when you're within a lift, it's such an antisocial space. You never look around, nor do you talk. But we wanted to create sky streets, because sky streets, horizontal movement, is so important to human well-being, to be able to see one another, to actually have eye contact. You make friends, you make bonds, and you have partners. And we create babies in Singapore. That's the key in Singapore. Public housing must have horizontal streets. But I think it's something that we do think is very essential, is to understand how people have, through visual connection, find social connection as well. So that correlation is something that was very crucial in this competition for us. And it also, for the 20 years after that, we have been trying to realize aspects of it in all our buildings. So in 2007, we were given a commission by the government to envision the future of housing. And we realized a lot of the ideas in the Duxton Plain competition. Just as a transformation of the forms, you can see we created vertical breezeways. We created sky parks on every 10th floor, 4 times in the buildings. And then the public space on the ground level, we want to keep as much of the large rain trees as possible so that we have a real park in the ground floor. And then, of course, a small little solar canopy. As you can see from the plan, it's a diamond shape. We are creating a negative space within the tower, creating a vertical breezeway. But what is really nice is that this borders a linear park in Singapore. Even in Queenstown, this pedestrian linear parks bring you all the way to the city. I've got quite a lot of our staff living in this building. They rented some of the rooms here, but the very fact that it's still 2 kilometers away from the office, or 2 to 3 kilometers away office, they would walk or cycle all the way in, and you won't cross traffic whatsoever. This is such a wonderful thing that we have in Singapore. And is in total, there are 960 units. 80 units form one sky community, but the idea of cities within cities, we want to also create a public plaza, a community space, and what better than to have a food center for Singapore, where people come together and actually eat in all these nice, long, concrete, long tables. And this was the park that I mentioned that we wanted to keep these rain trees. So from day one, when it was finished, you have this very mature park that's fronting the development. And as you can see in the section, the short section, you can see 4 levels of 200 meters long sky parks. And at the very top is actually what we call the penthouse for the people. Anyone can actually get up there. But what is really important is this diamond-shaped plan. You can see it allows cross-ventilation of all the apartments, but also the connections leading to the apartments is where you can look down into all these green spaces. What is really quite interesting is that I'm a product of housing policy in Singapore. I was conceived for the sole purpose of getting a public housing in Singapore. Because 60 years back, you must have 3 children before you can apply for public housing. I was conceived for just this purpose. So, my purpose in life has to do with public housing. So what was really interesting too, I grew up in a public housing facility, the usual slab block 10 stories in Tanglin Hawk. And what I do remember very clearly was the fact that I would be living on the 2nd floor, I would go down to the ground floor, my best pal would be living on the 10th floor. I would just shout out at him, we don't have handphones then, I would shout out to him and ask, could you come down and play? And he would come out and he would recognize the voice and recognize my face, and then he would come down. And this is the visual distance, audio and visual that you can connect, it's 10 stories. So we've broken up all the sky villages into 10 stories, but what was really crucial about this idea was that through all these walkways, you can look down to see the common space of this sky village and be able to recognize and see someone. So that on the left is the common space, so the corridors all look down to it, so you should be able to recognize someone if someone was to be at that level and you're on the 10th floor. But what is really quite interesting is this labyrinth of sort of a network of circulation. What is important about this vertical city typology is you don't necessarily need to go back to the ground level. With today's sort of grab delivery of food, we don't need to go down to the ground to buy food, it can be delivered. So you can actually stay up here, and that if you want to visit friends, you don't even need to get down to the ground. There were multiple alternative ways that you can hop around the building to visit your friends. So that's why we call it a vertical city typology. And on the top, of course, is the penthouse for the people. But what is really interesting for us is that we've been able to collect post-occupation data. And here we had a PhD student doing surveys of the building. What is really fascinating, it was comparing against an equally new and the same size development in the neighborhood, which is a Sky Terrace, and that they realized that because of the good cross-ventilation, passive strategy, the utility bills were about 20% less. And what is also more important, because of the idea of the Sky Village concept, and about the sky communities that we were trying to create, 1.3 times of the neighbors consider themselves friends. So this is a very, very interesting validation of our strategies.
No doubt this residential complex is quite big scale. It's like concrete jungle. But yeah, at the same time, it is quite small scale in the sense that the units are actually housed within certain villages. They're actually connected by all these intermediate sky gardens. It makes us want to not just stay within our homes, okay, but really to spend some time outside to just interact and bond with one another.
I think with all this being presented together, it increases the chance for interaction and also engaging the neighbor and the people around you. That's something that's lacking around in many parts of Singapore where you're just purely living in an urban jungle.
The idea of this building is trying to make it like a kampong style where you really try to meet up each other. When you're getting quite late in the night, it's actually very quiet. And the wind is good.
So we can have our dinners while enjoying the view over there. That makes it a perfect place for us to communicate and then to socialize among other neighbors.
This one is slightly lower in height, but the idea of the vertical kampong is a very important one. This is an integrated development where we have four main components: a medical center, social housing for the elderly, and then community spaces and also commercial spaces. So the moves are very straightforward, where we are creating a large sort of a footprint using the medical center that provides the shade and shelter for a public plaza and also to support a rooftop sky park. And then becomes a very safe and secure environment for the seniors. So this is the site elevation, the morning site, the east side, the colors in yellow. Also a very, we went beyond the project. We engaged HDB, we engaged the neighborhood to reclaim this, what used to be a service area and a vehicular access, to turn it into a pedestrian mall to go to the MRT, and turn it into a very, very nice, pedestrian-friendly, community-friendly walk to the MRT that also leads into the building. So as a cross-section of the building, you can see ground floor is a very shaded plaza space. Third and the fourth story, we have the medical center. The first and second is where we have the commercial spaces, and then the upper levels will become the community spaces for the young and also for the elderly. We tested out vertical phyto remediation for this building, where all the water are harvested, filtered as it comes through the vertical floors, and any excess gets discharged into the drains. The medical center looks inwards into a small little courtyard, a forest of courtyard, and just to help with the healing aspects of it, we gathered all the larger reception spaces for the medical center to look into this little courtyard. On top is a very nice, lush, verdant sky park for the community, the elderly community, and right at the very top, we put in the community farm. It was sort of the most inaccessible area, but we wanted to put the community farm there to emphasize it was necessary for the elderly to be active. So as you can see from the aerial view as a roof plan, the entire roof is covered with green. And I think in the tropics, the horizontal surface is where the sun hits it. If you cover it entire green, the building doesn't get heated up. That's the key idea of this. But what is also very interesting about this development is that when we compare it against neighborhood park, which is on the ground level, it has almost twice the amount of biodiversity in it. And that's because it was curated in such a way that we would have a lot more fruiting trees, and that we did not permit any fumigation, and that it all has to be nature means to tackle any vector control. And as a resultant, we had a lot more biodiversity in the sky park than compared on the ground level. So this is an interesting revelation. So again, as the ecosystem services, you can see it also performs something to 25 to 30% as compared to the land forest. It occupies the entire site area, but yet it still performs like a rainforest up to about 25 to 30%. But what is really interesting is the validation of this project through a study by another university where they use Bluetooth technology to map the movement of people. And some of the residents, the elderly, do not even come to the ground level for a whole week. They will move between their units, the hawker center, the food center, and the community park. They never come down to the ground level. So the idea of the ground not being important for vertical city was validated by this research by a PhD student. For us, when we look at the typology, we're always interested in scaling up. So this was the inner city competition in Hangzhou that we were able to win. But we were not asked to realize this, but it was more a academic and envisioning exercise for the city. But interesting that we were able to create a interesting sort of alternative to what was happening in Hangzhou and in China, where we created this typology where it has the lower levels as Sohos, almost like a street, sort of 4- or 5-story typology for finer scale ones. And then above, we have a matrix of both an elderly housing and relocation housing. And because this is Hangzhou, all the buildings are limited to a certain height because they do not want people to see any building from Westlake. But conversely, it's true, if you're on the top of the roof, you should be able to see Westlake. So in this case, we took the advantage of creating a rooftop that actually has a view of Westlake. And again, we were really excited to work in a different climate to create winter gardens, a balcony that has got operable windows that you can actually use to regulate the temperatures within the balcony and internally into the units. and creating elevated streets again to create more interesting environment to create people. And here bringing some of our hospitality projects experience to create cabanas plugged into the circulation spaces as mahjong cabanas. China is a very competitive and task-based for designers. While you might actually win the competition based on merit, it doesn't necessarily get you the commission. This is something we have learned the hard way. But as an academic exercise, because a lot of the universities were involved in, we felt that this was a very enriching experience for us to be able to help them unlock some of the potential of having regeneration within the cities. So this also included a retention and a restoration of an old factory with a funnel, and to turn it into a comedy space that is connected to the very active and vibrant community plaza level, which is on the lower ground level, that has all your comedy spaces, retail, shopping, recreational facilities, and also the streets of the Sohos. And from the top, looking down, you have this datum of housing, then the datum of the Sohos, then to the community spaces below. Maximize the potential of every datum, horizontal levels, new ground levels, to create recreational sporting facilities. This idea of the labyrinth of interconnected within a housing complex was something that we thought about in the Duxton Flame competition. And the Duxton Flame competition happened after 9/11. And it became very obvious that we should not have just one route of escape, but to have multiple alternative routes of escape. So where the idea of a snake and ladder kind of a strategy to be able to have multiple escape paths was very important, and also an alternative way of actually moving from, or going to see your friends, moving from one another. Okay, one very important moving up the scale is another typology, is what we call the inverted skyline approach. And I'll start off by showing you this little pavilion that we did with URA. The hosts are here today. A very interesting microcosm of Singapore and planning ideas. Okay, I think this is what we are trying to put within this pavilion. Doing it in Dubai is a highly interesting one for us because at 40 above temperatures, plants do not photosynthesize. They stop growing. So this was a very interesting thing that we must understand to create this lush and greenery in Dubai, and also to create the idea of a city in nature. So this was a huge challenge, but we felt that together with our ideas of the inverted skyline, where we use the roof layer to generate as much energy as possible through PV panels, we can convert this into energy for the plants through grow lights, and to let them grow in a sheltered environment that is less than 40 degrees. So this is why the buildings, the landscaping thrive in this pavilion, and that we were able to reduce the temperatures compared to outside, direct sun, by 6 to 10 degrees. So the ideas of really utilizing land was really foremost in our head, because it's really so ingrained in my thinking about being a Singaporean and living in Singapore that we are land limited, that we have to be very innovative and make full use of all the land that we have. And one thing that is a growing idea in my head is to always maximize the ground, 50% of it for landscaping. So in this case, 50% of the ground were used to grow large trees and provide the shade that's necessary for us, and also to provide the ecosystem services for the environment. So there were 4 layers. We had the ground layer, we had the canopy walk, and then we had the inverted ceiling as green too, which is something we innovated here. And then we had a new ground level, which was used as a sky market, and then top it off with the solar canopy. And then we created a very shaded and sheltered green, 3-dimensional green space. The ceiling is green, the walls are green, the ground is green. The plan was actually quite simple: 3 circles, 3 cones that supports a very large wafer of a community space at the top. So it winds itself into these cones. It has got thematic exhibitions within them. And then in one of the cone, we had accessibility for everyone to go right to the top. And the top is where we wanted people to gather and communicate. This was our new ground level. And also interesting too is the ecosystem services that we created. And it had staggering sort of a positive regenerative quality as compared to what is being done in the Middle East itself. I don't want to dwell too much about that one because there's an interesting topic after this. But we also scale up this typology again. For us, it may be a small pavilion, but it has such implication if we can actually scale it up. So we were given an opportunity to look at something in Karachi, where we were able to scale this up into 100,000 dwelling units, twice the density as compared to Kowloon walled city. But to use the principle of the pavilion, we were able to create actually a good design and a good concept for the desert area. Okay, the idea of the self-sufficient city is important for us at the larger scale. So this was detailed in our book, what we call the self-sufficient city, where a few layers are very important. The rooftop canopy layer is very important, generate energy and to also generate food. Workplace and the residential layer, which is the main layer. Then we have the parkland layer, where it is free from traffic as much as we can, vehicles. And then the transportation and service layer, which is also on the ground and basement. So with very clear layering for the cities, and also thinking as an inverted skyline, instead of the skyline that you have the up and down, that you that we are familiar with, say, New York and other cities. We wanted to reverse it to have a very porous ground level so that we can permeate the ground as much as we can, a very horizontal layer on the top that we can have not very efficient catchment for clean energy. So as translated in the section, this is what it actually kind of looks like. And then as you look from the top, we had as much surface area as possible. What is really quite interesting is that for a land-limited country like Singapore, if we are able to cover 35 to 40% of Singapore land area, we can be self-sufficient in energy. So the key is where do we find this 30 to 40% of surface area? So I think that's, we were contributing by thinking how a new town in Singapore, through having an inverted skyline, we can have a very large collective of solar PV collection on the roof. So this, below the solar canopy, you can have agri farming as well, agri-photovoltaic farming as well. So below the level of the PV, you also can have a very effective farming layer as well. And the ground level, very, very pedestrian friendly. This thinking of the inverted skyline self-sufficient city then gave birth to this master plan that we are doing in Singapore, and also this business park and the Singapore Institute of Technology University campus as well. This is one of the renderings of that, where we were able to cocoon large amount of nature itself and to retain it and to have a very mature park from day one. But it is not only is it a TOD, but the intention was it was also an EOD, an energy-oriented development, where we're utilizing the roof as much as possible to enlarge the catchment area as large as possible to generate as much energy as we can. But you can see with the idea of using a super block master planning approach, we remove a lot of the access roads, and we connected the basement for the cars to move around. And this is the thinking that we have, is that the future of mobility is not one that is self-driven. It will be driverless. It's also on demand. It's shared. And that a lot of the activities that happen in the basement may not need a lot of mechanical ventilation whatsoever. It is purely for storage, for parking, for logistic. So the idea of this is embedded in this master plan and the buildings. So the basement actually does a lot of district services, pneumatic services, logistic, the smart grid, and also the autonomous parking as well. And it also has the MRT and the bus station within the subterranean datum. So tropical public spaces on top of the MRT as the arrival space, as a covered tropical plaza for the district. And above that, a smaller atrium spaces, which we call the digital canyon, which is the workspace for some of the startups that they are trying to bring to this business park. And this was the SIT University Hall. This is the student forum and also the SIT University Library above. And it looks out into a community park, not just for the master plan, but for the larger housing estate, Pongo. And on top, JTC and also SIT will do some research and development in urban farms as well. One thing I want to end off is WOHA Futures, how we see the future. This is scaling up into a level of city thinking, where we think that cities has to contract rather than expand. We need to rewild as much as we can. We need to retreat, be denser, but still livable. And then this is the thinking that, in the future, cities needs to move into that direction, where we also start to rewild some of the areas that has been used before, and to not just create 15-minute cities, but vertical 15-minute cities. So this is the last video. I will let you enjoy in silence because it has got a BBC narrator talking about it.
Singapore will be a livable, sustainable and resilient city of the 22nd century. It will be a place where humans and nature coexist in regenerative circular systems. In the future, Singapore has transformed into an even more lush and green city-state. It is a home for humans and other living beings alike. It provides its residents with a great quality of life, with lots of amenities and community spaces that encourage a healthy and active lifestyle. Singapore is built for resilience. Biodiversity is thriving. It is self-sufficient in renewable energy, water and food, and is carbon neutral in its operations and in embodied energy. Yet Singapore is land limited. Its natural constraints have been a catalyst for the development of innovative solutions. In the future, it shrinks its urban footprint to be equal to 1 Earth or less. Singapore is an example that demonstrates how we can integrate circular systems into cities and enable change that benefits humans, the built environment, and nature. In the future, living, working, learning and playing does not take place solely in dedicated spaces like offices or classrooms. Our neighbourhoods will transform from mono-use to multi-use districts and cater to every aspect of our daily lives. Our built environment will be designed and built safely, faster, more efficiently and sustainably. Construction will be planned and controlled remotely, driven by automation and high technology. Humans are mostly off-site, and construction work is done mostly by drones and robots. Building typologies are flexible, adaptable, and future-proof. They are designed for final disassembly and the repurposing of materials in a circular system. Production and logistics can be located in subterranean levels. Innovative technologies like robotics, cobots, and AI are seamlessly integrated into workflows and the built environment. Our work and schooling is not solely desk-bound. Where we work from is flexible, and our workplaces are adaptable. Food production is decentralized and integrated into our three-dimensional city. Plant-based and cell-based food is produced on demand right at our doorstep. We have ample human and community-centric public spaces that allow us to enjoy our free time in our neighbourhood. Having these spaces nearby means we don't need to commute much anymore. Being close to amenities encourages us to stay active and spend time in nature. And we can spend more quality time with our loved ones at home. I propose that only by committing half of the planet's surface to nature can we hope to save the immensity of life forms that compose it. Edward O. Wilson, in Half-Earth. The 50-50 city commits half of its footprint to nature and the other half to urban spaces. This strikes a balance between natural and man-made systems. It restores and regenerates climatic and ecological systems, allowing biodiversity to thrive. Humans become the stewards of these nature reserves within their city and build a relationship with flora and fauna. By reserving 50% of the city for nature, biophilic environments are created that benefit all living creatures and provide valuable ecosystem services. Services like filtering our air, cooling down the ambient temperature, providing shade and producing the oxygen we need to survive. These natural spaces provide habitats for all kinds of animals, bringing biodiversity back into the city. In the future, our cities will undergo transformations to be people, community, and nature-centric. The future of mobility moves us away from busy above-ground roads full of private vehicles to mainly public modes of transportation. Roads gradually transform, reducing the number of lanes as demand falls due to a diverse and inclusive mobility system. Ultimately, they turn into green pathways for healthy and active mobility like walking, cycling, and PMDs. They are paved with PV panels that generate solar energy. On-demand autonomous vehicles transport us above and below ground, even underwater. The ground level is freed up for people and nature. Because highways and other urban connections are moved to lower and subterranean levels. We can navigate the city three-dimensionally, above ground, underground, and through the skies. The city will have space for nature to thrive, creating untouched habitats for biodiversity and fostering a sense of stewardship for our natural world. We have to restore nature. Our survival depends on it. Rewilding the city means giving substantial parts of the urban environment back to nature and natural spaces, and letting them run their course without much human interference. We care for nature by not taming it and giving it room to breathe. We create natural environments for a rich diversity of animals to make their home in. In turn, these spaces give back to us, triggering our biophilic response that gives us a sense of wellness and calm. Providing us with ecosystem services like cleaner air and water and cooler, more comfortable temperatures. Moving from segregated 2D urban planning to innovative integrated 3D planning saves time, space, energy, and emissions and increases people's quality of life. Our lives take place within a three-dimensional 15-minute sphere. "3D planning allows us to intensify land use both horizontally and vertically, with multiple ground levels and multiple urban connections from below ground to the sky. The high-density, high-rise, high-amenity urban planning approach layers and integrates systems vertically. There is a subterranean services and logistics layer, commercial, community, and nature layers on or near ground level, residential, food production, work, and office layers in the middle, and aerial drone and energy layers at the top.
I hope that the last 1.5 hours we have been able to show you and to explain our sort of approach and our design framework and methodology of how we evolve ourselves as creatures in nature from 30 years back to now, where I think it's very important for us to see ourselves as part of nature and to work with nature to ensure that as architects, we build for a built environment that is both regenerative and also ensure the survival of human beings. Thank you.
So thank you, Mun Summ, for the wonderful presentation, and I think this time for the further discussion and to elaborate more about the thought and reflection from the floor. So I think the work that you have done for so many years has proven that it requires an integral profession and thinking to work together in order to achieve this kind of high quality and regenerative product that you mentioned. Can you tell us more about the process? Because I don't think it's kind of, it's very challenging to integrate all the profession and thinking to create an integral environment as you proposed.
Yes, I think that's a very good question. And sometimes we like to live in our own world and create a virtual world instead of a real world. A lot of this competitions that we take part in, and also some of this envisioning exercise, is us trying to put across a message and also put across a suggestion of what the vision is. I think for us, the most important thing is a vision. And I think what we, in our day-to-day projects and our trying to even create a livelihood in what we do, we tend not to have the luxury to think too far and to envision a better future. But I think in today's world, it is so important for us to envision a better future. For me, I sometimes wake up in cold sweat, thinking that we're all going to burn in hell. Which, you know, walking in the streets of in Bangkok is kind of,
express
that, you know, it heightens that sense of fear, and maybe that's why I'm not sleeping very well the past few days. This thought of our planet degenerating is a very real one. And I think everyone is so caught with the idea of making a living. Corporations are caught up with making more money. It is so important that we really do have a future that we can actually give people hope. Okay, so a lot of the things, sadly, we don't get awarded a lot of the competitions that we take part in because we set ourselves too high a target and ambition. But for us, it's actually worth every single minute and ounce of thinking, because we sleep better because we feel like we have participated and that we know we have contributed. And I think this is something that is so important in the philosophy of our practice, is that we need to be good ancestors. Whatever we do, what we designed is for future generations and not for just ourselves. So this vision is important in bringing people along the journey. So architects are in many ways generalists. We are the people who bring all the various disciplines together, whether they are architects, whether they are engineers, mechanical, climate engineers, sociologists, landscape. I think we need that leadership to bring these people together. And I think this envisioning exercise does that for us. When we form a team, people do know what to aim for. It is not just getting on with our job and getting the fees into the pocket, but we want to go that extra mile to create a better environment for us. So I think, I agree with you, this is so difficult in practice to actually bring everyone together. But you lead by example. So, and I think that's what we always try to do.
Yeah. Some people think that it can only happen in Singapore because you have done so many example and learning curve, right?
Yeah.
Try and error, and then you can learn from many projects that you have done. And how you can convince the client and actually the government, because in our context, sometimes we're already giving up already that the architect doesn't be able to change so much, that much.
We now come to not a sad conclusion, but we always go, when we go head on to a competition or a new project, we always know that 50% we are not likely to get the job. Okay, so like the one in Hangzhou city, we were brought in by a couple of professors in the university who seen Kampong Admiralty and some of our projects and felt that we had a very good social agenda in our projects, and they wanted to bring us in for the purpose of sharing our ideas and to open the minds of some of the city decision makers. So we knew that we are most likely never going to get a job, but we felt it was necessary for us to contribute towards the academic and also the political discussion. So we do it because we feel it's a good thing to do. And not everything should be done for money, and not everything should be done for expediency. We do need to pause, calibrate, and think how we could contribute. So yes, I think that's the approach.
Right. And I do believe that your work is work very closely from the research and academic point of view to the practice, and also work very closely with the policy. How can you manage or navigate that great combination to your work?
One thing that I must say is that Singapore is a very good place to work and test our ideas. We have very good framework in clear policies, very transparent, and also a very collaborative government and institutions to work with. We are never shy to discuss and to ask whether certain things could be, discussed and to improve and to. And I think that's the good institutions that we have in Singapore, and that is something that I think allows progress to be made. So that's something quite important. But yeah, I have to say that's for me the environment in Singapore is very good. But when we bring it overseas, it's not as easy to figure out the political landscape, and also the subtleties in the way the city functions. Like I said earlier, China is a very interesting playground, but also a very difficult one to penetrate as well. We are fairly noted for what we do in China, but we don't get as many commissions as we would actually win the competitions, and that's because that the last bit of Guanxi, it's something that I have to say myself in my practice is not very good at. The relationship is missing with the Chinese cities, but as people getting out there to promote ideas, I think that's something that we can do quite well.
Right. So now probably some of you from the floor, from the audience, may want to discuss and exchange. Yes, please.
One thing that I do want to add was the question of how do we work with policymakers.
Right.
That's why when we did the book Garden City, Mega City, the intention was not just for undergraduates of design and architecture, but also for decision makers. We sent out the book to a lot of all the universities, notable universities, and some important decision makers like Elon Musk, but I don't think he actually looked at the book. But we also sent it to a couple of mayors and governors, which we received letters from them thanking us and saying that we provided them useful ideas. But also at the same time, like we had very good success story in Taiwan, because Taiwan is very collaborative in the way they do work. One of the university professor in Taichung invited us to bring breathing architecture to Taichung and Taipei for exhibition, but with the intent of us working together with the local industry and developers to try and realize some of the ideas that we have to the cities.
Yeah.
And with that project, the one in Taichung, Sky Green, which I didn't show, we were able to help formulate new policies within the city itself.
Right.
So it's a collaborative effort. The city must want it first, right? But we think when actually the story was quite funny when the city wanted to transform itself from an industrial city to a green city, they Googled green architecture, and our name popped up. You see. So and then she got to learn more about us, and then she connected with us, and
Right.
then everything happened after that.
Hope we can get a book to my governor or some governments
Well,
later.
good thing is that I think I've got my last breath, my last energy is to do the follow-up of this book, Garden City, Mega City, is to do the second version of it, which will hopefully incorporate some of the ideas we have and still some of the newer ideas that we think helps to the whole planet to get into carbon neutrality. I think that's quite important because design as a people don't see design as important as it should be. Even in universities or even getting grants and things like that, design is not acknowledged as science or technology. If you say you're inventing something to extract carbon in the air, you get a grant very easily,
Right.
get funding. But if you say you're going to design a more carbon neutral city, you don't get that, So this is funny where design is not as valued as we all think, and that's a sad truth. But nevertheless, we are the ones who provide the vision, the real visuals for the vision. And I think that's where it's important for us to continue doing that.
Yeah, thank you. So the question from the floor. Yes.
ครับ Thanks for your impressive presentation, Mun Summ. And I'm very interested in this vertical city expansion that you mentioned about, that you believe that the city should be contract rather than expand. So I'd like to know comparatively like what Corbusier trying to explore in Chandigarh city in India, which doesn't seem like it doesn't work that well, doesn't work as good as many of your building in Singapore. So I'd like to know whether this vertical city kind of idea would work well only in Singapore or in very dense city like Singapore.
Yeah.
What is the limitation of the vertical expansion? What is the right balance it would be, in your opinion? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that the city of tomorrow, as envisioned by Le Corbusier, was appropriate in its time. I think you need to put in context time. At that point of time, his ideas were very fundamental. It is not the same as we are today. His vision was for a city of 1 to 3 million people. Okay? But now today, we are talking about cities that are, what, Bangkok is 20 million?
12.
12. The mega cities in the rest of the world is sometimes 20 to even 50. And the mega cities in China sometimes all join up into one large one. So the situation is quite different. And I think we all do know that cities are where you go make money and the wealth is. I think with pandemic, people are thinking and suggesting that maybe cities is in the future. But the reality is that we all need to make a living. People do always gravitate to cities to make money, to make a livelihood. So I think that premise still should stay. But to depend on private vehicles, I think it's the wrong strategy now. So that's what the automobile was really sort of cited as the solution for Le Corbusier's future, the city of tomorrow. But for us, it's all about public mode of mobility for mass transportation. Okay? And this is very important also. Technology takes a very long time to scale up and to implement. But we do need to plan for it. So whatever Le Corbusier did only starts to be scaled and implemented today. That's why the wrong principle is applied because the situation has changed. So that distance, the time and distance is the issue now. But so that's where it's important for us to envision what the future of mobility is. And it's very clear, and I think most cities are also going for a lot of mass mode of transportation, MRT, LRT. Those are the right directions. But we kind of need to see hand in hand with mobility, and that's where transport-oriented development is important. I added an E to it, is energy transport-oriented development, because buildings and developments must perform more than just one purpose itself. So I think that's very important for us to add on more demand of what the buildings can do for us. So I think that I think we do need to see what we are today, and to actually see the new technologies and the new innovations that will come, and to be able to adapt our built environments and our policy towards it. We kind of need to act a little faster, not like what happens in the past. It took so long to roll out all this two-dimensional planning, and that created a lot of the reliance on automobiles.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the floor, from the audience? Yes, please.
So actually before the lecture, we talked about election that's coming in May in Thailand. Not gonna ask you to predict the outcome, but just wondering, because we've seen that you have worked with the Singapore government for many projects and many kind of like types, not just to design the building, but also work with the policymakers. So maybe you can, explain to us a little bit more of how we should work with the government or expand our role to be more, effective.
Effective, productive.
I think I'm opening act for Fang Xiuling afterwards in the afternoon, and we got to know each other through work, and I think we talk frankly about what we do in our built environment. I think that's necessary. It's a necessary thing to be human at the end of the day for me. It's to be able to communicate and be honest about it. I think if you have a hidden agenda, it's never good. Okay, so my advice is be honest and be upfront with the agenda. Acoustic is important, and that it's not for self-benefit. It's very important, and I think if you go in that premise to discuss with decision makers, policy makers, you're heading in the same direction. Yeah, we are all heading the same path. So that's I think for me the best advice that I would ever give to anyone. If we have a hidden agenda, it's always tricky about it. So I think that's not a good thing to do. Yeah, I mean we try to. I think it's important to see. I think a lot of architects tend to see in a very narrow, sort of a closed manner, but policymakers, city planners, takes care of a larger population and larger base. Architects tend to think of it a little bit more narrow because they are doing just a building. So I think this is where I think for us, we always use our designs to harbor a wider effect and good. It's not, and in fact, I think it's for a very long time. We gave a lecture in Harvard quite long ago, and there was a very illuminating experience that we had, where students were saying, "How come you speak in such simple language?" And they said it was very refreshing. But also at the same time, the backhanded approach was they think that we were not architects. We were anything other than architects. We are not talking about form, beauty, other things. We were talking about different aspects of design and architects. So this is where I think we were very sadly misunderstood, we felt. And that's where we did this Garden City, Mega City, to try to share our ideas. For us, it's an open source. We want people to take our ideas, dissect our buildings, and to use it as much as possible. Our ideas, I don't think that it's a lot of innovation in the details that we do. It's not, because a lot of these things are limited by budget, limited by climate and all that. But there is a lot of innovation you can do to how you put buildings together, how you put various buildings together. A lot of innovation in that. And I think we are just barely scratching the surface. So this is, I think for us, the most important thing. That's why when Patrick Bingman Hall was saying that the expression of buildings is really the programmatic one that is very important. So when you see Kampong Admiralty, you see this funny hillscape, right, in a building. And that's because we were creating a hill, Right. We wanted to create a hill that helps to do vertical phytoremediation. So that expression is very new. And there's another professor who calls our work ugly new. Anything that is new doesn't please the eye, okay? It's a little odd. So that's why the term ugly new was used to describe our work. But I think now it's putting trees on buildings, it's so popular. Even Fujimoto put trees in it. I was having a discussion with him and he said, yes, now I am forced by clients to put trees on my buildings too, you know. So and I think this is where, sadly, greening buildings is also becoming a ism, a fashion as well. But that's why when I talk about what I talk about just now, it's more than greening. I talk very little about putting trees on buildings. It's the ideas behind it for us that's important. But we are recognized as people who we are the funny architects who put trees on buildings.
Okay. So I think it's about sustainability, it's about sustainable architecture.
It's more than sustainability. I think it's all about well-being. It's all about sustainability. It's also resilience. But at the end of the day, the most important thing, regeneration of our planet that we need to think about.
Yeah.
So because that ensures the survival of the human species.
Right.
It is endangered.
Right. So
at the rate we are doing, we are killing ourselves. That's the truth.
Hi. I tapping on the idea that 50% of the city should be given back to the nature. I was just thinking about how about the existing urban fabrics. For example, I understand that WOHA is in a shop house, and all those areas, perhaps high rises and all those things, perhaps not so applicable. So I just want to hear a little bit more about your thoughts about how does this kind of new typologies of green buildings or high-rise buildings could integrate with the existing heritage and existing urban fabrics, because I think it's going to be a problem in Thailand or Bangkok as well, because gentrifications are happening, but it's very sad to see all those old shop houses to be gone. Yeah, so I mean, how to reach a balance between these two? Yeah.
I think heritage is important. I'm not ignoring or discarding heritage. I think it's important. Shop houses is something that we should keep. It has such beautiful human scale that we constantly always relate to in our buildings, how we try and bring scale back to something that is more domesticated, that heritage buildings actually is such a source of inspiration. But the idea of 50-50 city is something that I think is easier when you do a master plan. That the last video clip was a envisioning exercise that we did, but it guides us to do master planning, large areas for master plans. We use that as the basis, the framework for our master plans in China. So over the COVID period, it was quite good. We were being engaged by a large developer in China to create a blueprint for their future city planning. And that 50 city was an important criteria. So China is constantly going to expand, and we felt it was necessary for them to embrace the idea of 50-50 city, where if they do have to plan a new master plan, is there a possibility now to turn 50% of it in green? But and that was a very strong idea, which interesting enough, they liked it a lot. They think that was a responsible direction to do. The good thing about China is it's a socialist country. The decision makers at the end of the day respond to altruistic social values. And I think this was one of those things that they embraced, and from then onwards, all their future master plans embrace that as a key strategy. But one thing I also think is very possible, not in a shop house because it's already a built form, but as a new building like for me, the Singapore Pavilion was such a good example, where we literally had 50% of the grounds, the plot given to us as green as well, because the structure that lightly touched the ground is just the cones. Then it supported a larger floor plate above, and that we were able to limit our footprint on the building itself and to actually give more ground space for the planting of trees. So that itself It's a very radical rethink of how we build buildings. It's not one that sits with a large footprint on the ground, but one that's inverted. We touch lightly on the ground, maybe it supports a larger top instead, so that you can actually free up the space on the ground for nature a little bit. Again, the idea is to embrace and work with nature.
Okay, thank you. So I think due to the time limitation, maybe do you have any more questions? Right. Okay. So I think today you have shown us the ability and the ambition and also the passion of how we can create the better future through architecture. And I think what inspired me the most is the picture that you feeding the birds at that time. I think at the end of the day, what we need is the simple life that we can live truly with nature. So thank you very much for Mun Summ for today's lecture and presentation. Thank you.